Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the last 10 years, 170 people have been killed on Shropshire's roads. Quite simply, this motion says that one death is too many, and we need to make reducing the number to zero a clear priority for this council. It's neither inevitable nor acceptable that anyone should be killed or seriously injured when travelling in Shropshire. When we leave our homes each day, we should still feel safe and confident about the journey ahead. Yet for 121 people last year alone, that wasn't the case. Today, I'm calling on all of us to draw a line in the sand and say that with one voice, we in Shropshire will reduce the number of people killed or seriously injured to zero. If death or serious injury from road traffic crashes on the UK's roads were a cancer, it would represent the 5th leading new cancer diagnosis in the country. This is a public health emergency. Health inequalities also play a big part. Children in the most deprived 20% of areas are 6 times more likely to be injured than those in the least deprived 20%. And 16 children are killed or seriously injured in road crashes every week on their way to or from school. Unfortunately, curing cancer is not in our remit, but reducing deaths and serious injuries in Shropshire absolutely is. Following several tragic deaths in and around the River Severn, a comprehensive review has been commissioned by Shropshire Council. This uses the ROSPA hierarchy of risk control, which states the most effective action is elimination of danger. In a road context, this would mean stopping people from travelling, which of course is completely impractical and nonsensical. This is why Vision Zero specifically rules out approaches discouraging vulnerable people from using the roads at all and reducing their mobility options. The next most effective is substitution and engineering controls. In a general sense, this means smaller vehicles and separation of modes of transport. The least effective is PPE, body armour, helmets and high visibility clothing. Vision Zero is about reframing our attitude to road danger and collisions. Professor Rachel Aldred from the University of Westminster and journalist Laura Laker have developed the road collision reporting guidelines. Professor Aldred said, "The research tells us that language matters, as it helps shape how we see and treat others. So, for instance, referring to drivers rather than only their vehicles helps remind us that behind every vehicle, be it a car, an HGV, a cycle or motorcycle, is a person making decisions that affect the safety of others." The resulting 10 guidelines are supported by prominent organisations of professionals, including the AA, the FIA Foundation, Road Peace, the Transport Research Laboratory, and Transport for London, British Cycling, Sustrans, Cycling UK, and Living Streets. As a council, we should incorporate these guidelines into our documentation and communications. We should also be asking others in Shropshire, such as our local newspapers and radio stations, to do the same, as well as our partners such as West Mercia Police. Shropshire Council is currently reviewing the key performance indicators that will support the Shropshire Plan. I am pleased that number of people killed or seriously injured in a road traffic accident is on the list, but I would ask that accident is replaced by crash or collision. Vision Zero may seem like a theory, something that is unachievable. It has already been achieved. The government in Norway has made a strong commitment to eliminate serious injuries and fatalities on their roadways nationally, and has worked towards this vision for nearly 2 decades. In 2015, the city of Oslo made a commitment toward Vision Zero. As a result, between 2014 and 2018, the risk of fatal or serious road traffic injuries on a trip-by-trip basis has fallen 47% for cyclists, 41% for pedestrians, and 32% for drivers. Other local authorities in the UK have adopted this approach, notably in London, but most recently in Oxfordshire, which is not much different to our own county. I'm sure that all members will agree that road deaths and injuries are unacceptable, and we as a council should act to eliminate them. By voting for this motion today, we can adopt a policy which will reduce road deaths and injuries in Shropshire to zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, let's see, this is supported by the Liberal Democrat group, but can I have a name to second, please? Thank you. Councillor Batsma. Okay. Are you going to speak now? Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Dartnell. We in the Labour group are proposing an amendment to the motion. Can I now speak to that?
Yep.
Yep. We fully support this motion. It's forward thinking and it's what we must do to protect the public, whether they're drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, whatever, on our roads. Since the widespread use of sat-navs began around 2008, local neighbourhoods have experienced a huge increase in through traffic. Implementing a universal all Shropshire 20 mph speed limit in all residential areas, whether urban or rural, is a low-cost policy with a proven golden thread of gains. These include road safety improvements, reduced environmental pollution in neighbourhoods, noise reduction, improved health, improved social connectivity between homes, improved especially respiratory health in children. Sorry, that was about improved health. Emissions are significantly reduced, comparing 30 to 20 mph speeds in motor cars or other vehicles, 26% reduction in carbon emissions and 28% in nitrous oxide. Very difficult to achieve otherwise. 20 is Plenty, which is a campaign across the UK wanting to bring 20 as a limit in all residential areas. On their website say the following: higher vehicle speeds blight communities and inhibit the ability of residents to walk, cycle and use public transport. It is clear that lower speeds save lives and reduce pollution, and that 20 miles an hour can be the cornerstone of building inclusive communities. In successive UK government surveys, 70% said that 20 miles an hour was the right speed limit for residential streets. So I ask members to accept this amendment and adopt a 20 mile an hour residential speed limit in the interests of all in Shropshire.
Thank you, Rosemary. Seconded by? Oh, thank you. Well done. Okay. Can't see any hands. The seconder, would you like to say something? Well, I know, but you can reserve the right. You're the only speaker, so I can go to the vote if you want, and then you won't be able to say anything.
Well, it seems self-evident, and we've discussed this on numerous occasions through the years, that 20 miles an hour limits do significantly save lives and save the risk of serious injury. This is part and parcel of the motion that the overarching motion that is about zero deaths and massive reductions in collisions, and it seems to make sense to highlight this as a specific factor that we ought to be working towards now and not putting it off any later.
Thank you. Okay, we will move to the vote on the amendment from Councillor Dartnell.
Mr. Speaker, I think the mover of the motion has a right of reply to the amendment.
Well, okay, if you would like to reply to your seconder.
Oh, I said the mover of the motion, of the original motion, has the right of reply to the amendment.
But he's not indicated. I would expect the mover of the... Oh, right, okay, Rob, sorry, I didn't see you.
Thank you. I am absolutely in support of 20 mile an hour residential limits, but I think it's important that we put to the vote, because I know it's something that's been disputed before in this chamber, and I would on that like to request a recorded vote.
Isn't it? Okay. I would ask if you want to speak, even if you are the original proposer of the original motion, please do indicate. Thank you.
So this is a vote now.
On the, we're voting on the amendment. It's a recorded vote. So,
Roy Allcroft.
Against.
Jeff Anderson. Caroline Bagnall. Nicholas Bardsley. Joyce Barrow. Bernie Bentic.
Against.
Thomas Biggins. Edward Bird. Andy Boddington. Peter Broomhall. Julia Buckley,
For.
Gary Birchett, Gwilym Butler,
Against.
Dean Carroll, Steve Charmley, Rachel Connolly, Rosemary Dartnell, Steve Davenport, Mary Davies, Julian Dean, Jeff Elner, David Evans, Julia Evans, Roger Evans,
For.
Paul Gill, Nat Green, Kate Halliday, Simon Harris, Nigel Hartin, Nick Hignett, Ruth Houghton, Richard Huffer, Tracy Huffer, Vince Hunt,
Against.
Kirsty Hurst-Knight, Mike Isherwood, Mark Jones, Simon Jones, Duncan Kerr, Heather Kidd, Christian Lee, Hilary Luff, Nigel Lumby, Elliot Lynch, Robert Macy, Richard Marshall, Dan Morris, Pam Mosley,
For.
Alan Mosley, Cecilia Motley, Peggy Mullock, Ian Nellins, Kevin Pardy, Viv Parry, Tony Parsons, Leslie Picton, Ed Potter, Chris Schofield, Dan Thomas, Edward Towers, David Vasmer, Alex Wagner, Claire Wilde, Brian Williams, Rob Wilson, Paul Wynne. Thank you.
For, 38 against, so the amendment has fallen. We will go back to the original motion.
Mr. Speaker, may I?
Yep, you may. You have every right to, as everybody else does.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Councillor Wilson, I did actually write to you making a suggestion regarding this motion, but I didn't receive a response. If I take you back to, I think it was the council meeting of September of last year, it may have been July, forgive me, you brought a motion to council which was about putting monies into a highways budget for certain things. And the one thing I said at the time was that I was not willing to commit this council to expenditure via a motion which is uncosted. You say in your visions, in your motion, that this has, I think, little financial impact on the council. I beg to differ on that. The advice that I have been given, and also advice from other sources, and one of which I will quote to you in a moment because I think it is quite interesting, is that this can have significant impact on council's finances. at a time when you are well aware that we have very limited budgetary work. Now, I don't think there is a huge amount in this motion that in general, most members on the left-hand side, as I'm looking, would agree with. But I am not willing to commit finance on this council, which is uncosted as far as this motion goes. What I asked you was, please defer it, come back with an idea of cost, and then we would look at it again. I think the most interesting document that I found was actually written by Professor John Whiteleg and Gary Hack, which is actually about Vision Zero, where it says one of the biggest issues around Vision Zero is the financial cost and the difficulty in costing that. So I'm sorry, Rob, it's not that we don't agree with it. And Rosemary, please don't think we don't agree with some of the 20-mile-an-hour work. Members on my side of the chamber are working on that at the moment, but I will not commit this council to finance that it simply doesn't have. So I'm very sorry, Rob, but we will be voting down this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Morris and then Councillor Dean.
Can I fully associate myself with the comments of the leader? Furthermore, we currently have 20-mile-an-hour speed limit trials in Port Hill, and we're also looking at 20-mile-an-hour speed limits outside schools, and that is an ongoing process. So I would suggest that we are looking at this and carefully costing it out, and to commit ourselves to a fully uncosted thing like this in times of austerity would be irresponsible.
Councillor Dean.
Thank you. First of all, the concept of Vision Zero is, of course, in the end, a cost-saving exercise for the public sector, because we know that accidents actually cost the public sector money, whether or not they cost the council money directly. There's so quite apart from saving lives, in the long run, it's actually cheaper for us to be safe. But I'm very confused because the report does not commit to huge spending of money. It commits to instruct officers to bring a paper to Cabinet within 12 months to address how these points will be achieved. If at that point the Tories then decide, no, we can't afford to save lives, then you can make that decision at that point. But it doesn't actually commit us to spending money. And we've done this with river safety. We've had reports which presumably will result in some spending. This seems to be a very strange decision to avoid even considering the options. So I support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Roger Evans and then Councillor Heather Kidd. Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't know the council could spend £1. I thought it was the Cabinet that allocates money as per the policies set by the council. I refer back a number of years ago now, 5, 6, it seems like it seems ages ago, to the council decision about 20-mile-an-hour outside schools. It took over nearly 2 years for that to start to do it. Council is not spending money. Council is saying this is what is wanted. So to say this is uncosted, I don't think is a relevant argument to this. Council sets policy and then the Cabinet interprets it and allocates money as it decides. That is how this council decided when it went to the Cabinet system many years ago. And I would suggest that is the way this could be adjusted and do it. So I am surprised to hear the argument that was put forward a few minutes ago. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Heather Kidd.
Thank you. It's an interesting one that we now have to cost everything. I do remember Dan Morris's motion coming forward, which I fully supported, about the 20-mile-an-hour outside school, and presumably, as that was uncosted, we shouldn't have actually been given the opportunity to support that. It is a very slowly being rolled out. I still support it because actually I have many children who can't safely walk to school in Worthing. I keep doing this, but actually if we now have a rule about costed motions or uncosted motions, then it needs to be absolutely clear and it needs to be fair across the board, because Dan Morris's motion was not costed at the time. although I did support that, no, it was not costed at the time. I would really like at this point to plea for a rural pilot, wherever that might be, for the rollout of schools, because actually they're all, or both of them that have gone forward, are urban, and I need more to that. It also would aid exercise, it would aid zero carbon, it would aid many, many things wherever it happens. But this issue about costed or uncosted now has to be clear for the future and not just for now. And I'm far from sure that this actually does require huge costing. And if something is turned down in the future because it doesn't appear to be costed, then we need to see the exact reasoning as to why it appears to be costed, needs to be costed, because otherwise lots of things can be turned down. So it's a procedural matter, but actually a plea for rural pilots too of the 20 mile an hour.
Thank you. I've now got councillors Richard Marshall and Duncan Kerr. Then I'm minded to try and draw a little bit. Okay, Rosemary. After that, I'm going to draw a little bit of a line under this because we had a fair bit of debate on the amendment as well about the original, which covered the original motion. So, Richard, councillor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've listened to this debate so far and about the cost, but I'll also declare I have thoroughly looked into the whole of this Vision Zero ideology, basically. And I know in the original report, Councillor Wilson started to speak about Oslo and how they achieved 0 deaths. That figure in itself is not strictly true. They achieved 0 vulnerable road user deaths. There was deaths of motorists, but it's also interesting to note in Oslo, the car is banned in the majority of the city, which, you know, that's a little bit of a totalitarian state to be banning cars from everything. In the other areas that the cars were not banned, there is physical structure and barriers separating cars with cyclists and people walking, pedestrians. So therefore, I think it is very, very fair of the leader to state that there is significant cost attached to this motion. And without those costs of the infrastructure to separate and divide, it can't really be passed. You're actually asking not only for us to adopt the vision, you're asking us to give a date as well of when that vision will be in place. And so I'm in absolute full agreement with the leader. There's no costing on this at all.
Councillor Duncan Kerr.
Yeah, it's curious as to why residents in Essex and Kent have probably got more financial problems than any other council in the county. Is it 50 million they overspend, the auditors have told them? So residents of those are benefiting from a council that is willing to set a Vision Zero target. And residents of Shropshire are just told, oh no, you can't afford it, without ever costings to turn it down, because there's no costings, you're arguing to adopt it, and equally you've got no costings to turn it down. It is a direction of travel, it's a vision, and it sets out a commitment. And that's why your peers, Conservative run councils in Essex and Kent, have adopted it. There's nothing unconservative about doing that, and I'd urge you to do the same here.
Councillor Rosemary Dartnell, then we're going to...
Thank you very much. The leader's comments about the 20 mile an hour speed limit in residential areas. I'd just like to point out that it's generally considered to be the case that universal adoption of that throughout an area such as Shropshire is far less costly than adopting and more effective than adopting it piecemeal, which is what the council is doing by doing it outside certain schools and so on and so forth. So that's point number one about finance. So perhaps it might be more fiscally responsible to look at a universal adoption of that policy. Also, Councillor Kerr's just said many of the things I was going to say. This motion isn't about leaving here and this afternoon ripping up our roads and replacing them with perfect, safe Vision Zero roads and cycle lanes and so on and so forth. It's about setting a vision, setting an ambition for safety. And for me, I just can't imagine that, well, I can't understand why we couldn't do that, why we don't want to do that. It's about saying whenever we change any road setup, we look at it from a Vision Zero point of view. And that is the way forward. We have to change. to make our roads safer. So why not adopt this as an underlying policy and use it to inform how we move forward? It doesn't, of course, achieving perfection would be costly, but that's not what's being asked for here. We're asking for an ambition.
Thank you. Councillor Vasmer, you seconded and at the beginning, some time ago.
Yes,
reserved your right.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Yes, so the mask really has fallen off the Conservatives here today, hasn't it? They really are the nasty party. It's, here we're talking about reducing deaths, reducing serious injuries on our roads, and yet the Tory party wants to do absolutely nothing about it. This is a great motion. We're adopting a Vision Zero, which will inform all the activities of the Highways Department, really, in terms of its planning, in terms of its design of roads. It's a new vision. It's a different way of approaching road design. I mean, it's something which we should adopt now, because we're not calling for the kind of barriers which Councillor Marshall talked about. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about in item 6 is that we investigate this, get officers to investigate this and come back to Cabinet and make a report. Just as we did, by the way, on the A41 motion. I don't know if perhaps I ought to remind Tory councillors here that we had a motion about the A41, which of course we all supported, about reducing death and injuries on the A41, which was quite right. I supported it, but we didn't have any costings for that, did we? I wonder why we haven't asked for costings today. And the reason is because the Conservatives don't want to support this. They don't really support taking real action to reduce deaths on our roads. Basically, what happens in this council a lot of the time is that we get motions like school streets motion, like 20-mile-per-hour motion, and it takes ages to get them implemented. And now we really have the mask is off. They don't really want to do anything. They'd rather carry on as we have been, and we see an increasing number of deaths on our roads. We need to tackle this. We need to do something about it, and this motion sets out a way forward. It doesn't actually say that we should commit ourselves to money. It just says, here is a way of reducing deaths on our roads. Here is a way of organising ourselves better in the future. And it's a great shame that the Conservative Party here today are not supporting it.
Thank you. I sometimes wonder if I'm listening to the same debate as some members, but there you go. So, Rob, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just some responses. Councillor Picton is correct that I did bring a motion to ask for more money to be spent on the barriers which Councillor Marshall has suggested. That was rejected. I understand why, because although it didn't commit to a capital sum, it did commit to a percentage sum. I'm disappointed that nothing further has been brought forward by the administration, but that's where we are. As others have said, all this motion does really is ask for a report to come to Cabinet in 12 months. I imagine that would make some recommendations, which the Cabinet could then choose to reject, depending on finances and costings as developed by officers. That's all it's asking for. If at that moment in time, the Cabinet decides that we do not have the money to reduce KSIs on our roads, then that's what they decide. I disagree, but that's the decision they make with the political makeup of this council. Councillor Dean, you've talked about doing a paper to Cabinet. I think members obviously be very wise to listen to him. I absolutely agree with Councillor Roger Evans. This is about setting policy, not about talking about budgeting and financing. Councillor Heather Kidd's comment about having this actually moving out into our rural areas is a really, really important point. I don't really want to get into Councillor Marshall's culture war about ideology and totalitarianism. I think that's really unhelpful in debates such as this. I really don't want to see Shropshire Council head down the line that some other councils have done. I think, unfortunately, he is trying to take us that way, and we would do well to resist that. Councillor Kerr, yes, absolutely, is setting a vision, as we did with the climate emergency that was declared in this room, I think probably 3 years ago. I think it was actually the actual successful motion in the end was brought by Councillor Carroll. I don't believe there were any costings in that motion either, but that has driven a lot of the work that we have done since, and I applaud that. And Councillor Dart's correct. Currently what we're doing is very piecemeal, and we should bring things together into one coherent policy, which, as Councillor Dean said earlier, could actually save the public sector money. And I know this is going to be unpopular, but I would like to request another recorded vote.
I think that's enough. I don't think you need to count them. Okay, record it, vote it will be. I suspect it may be very similar to the last one, but Chief Executive.
Roy Allcroft,
Against.
Jeff Anderson,
Against.
Caroline Bagnall, Nicholas Bardsley, Joyce Barrow, Bernie Bentinck,
For.
Thomas Biggins, Edward Bird, Andy Boddington, Peter Broomhall, Julia Buckley,
For.
Gary Birchett, Gwilym Butler, Dean Carroll,
Against.
Steve Charmley, Rachel Connolly, Rosemary Dartnall, Steve Davenport, Mary Davies, Julian Dean, Jeff Elner, David Evans, Julia Evans, Roger Evans,
For.
Paul Gill, Nat Green, Kate Halliday, Simon Harris, Nigel Hartin, Nick Hignett, Ruth Houghton, Richard Huffer, Tracy Huffer, Vince Hunt,
Against.
Kirsty Hurst-Knight, Mike Isherwood, Mark Jones, Simon Jones, Duncan Kerr, Heather Kidd, Christian Lee, Hilary Luff, Nigel Lumby, Elliot Lynch, Robert Macy, Richard Marshall, Dan Morris, Pam Mosley,
For.
Alan Mosley, Cecilia Motley, Peter Mullock, Peggy Mullock, excuse me. Excuse me.
Peter?
My sincere apologies. Peggy Mullock, Ian Nellings, Kevin Pardy, Viv Parry, Tony Parsons, Leslie Picton, Ed Potter, Chris Schofield, Dan Thomas, Edward Towers, David Vasmer, Alex Wagner, Claire Wild, Brian Williams, Rob Wilson, Paul Wynne. Thank you.
That seems to have been a debate of Freudian slips and votes. Okay, that is 27 for and 38 against, so that motion has fallen. We will move